and I was Roger the Helper. I don't know why Roger the Helper, but when I wasn't in school or captured by my parents, I was at Joe's Garage.
For over a decade, Roger Barr was the beating heart of one of cable television's most beloved car shows. Fans didn't just watch him work. They came to the shop specifically hoping to meet him. Wayne Carini himself admitted that people would walk straight past him just to shake Roger's hand. Then, without a single word of explanation, Roger vanished. No farewell episode, no announcement, nothing. And when he finally did speak, what came out wasn't just about a job ending. It was about a workplace injury, a workers' compensation dispute, a termination delivered by email, and a friendship built over 6 decades that dissolved without so much as a phone call. The disappearance that fans felt before anyone explained it. When Roger Barr stopped appearing on Chasing Classic Cars after season 14, the audience noticed immediately. Not after a few episodes, immediately. Because Roger wasn't background texture on that show, he was a core reason millions of people tuned in every week. He was the gruff, encyclopedic old mechanic who had forgotten more about European automobiles than most certified technicians would ever learn. And watching him work was genuinely compelling in a way that no amount of television productions could manufacture. What made his absence so jarring was the complete silence around it. The network said nothing. The production company said nothing. Wayne Carini, the man who had known Roger since childhood and employed him for over a decade, said nothing specific either. Fans flooded online forums. They posted on social media. They searched for any fragment of information that might explain where he had gone. The most optimistic assumption was retirement. The darkest rumors suggested he had passed away and the show was simply moving on without acknowledging it. Neither turned out to be true, though the real answer was in some ways harder to hear than either of those possibilities. What most people searching for answers did not realize was that the story of Roger's disappearance didn't begin with a falling out between two men. It began with a car. A specific car. A rare Belgian-built Minerva that Wayne and his business partner had acquired. And what happened while Roger was working on that car set off a chain of events that none of the people involved were prepared for. 60 years of history before a single camera ever rolled. To understand how significant this split actually was, you have to understand how far back these two men go. Wayne Carini grew up in Glastonbury, Connecticut, where his father, Bob Carini, ran a local body shop. Just down the road, Roger Barr operated his own repair facility, specializing in foreign and European cars. The two shops developed a working relationship out of practical necessity. If a car at Bob's shop needed complex mechanical work beyond body repair, it went to Roger. If something at Roger's shop needed bodywork, it came back the other way. They shared customers, they built mutual trust. And young Wayne, still in elementary school at the time, grew up treating Roger's garage like a personal wonderland. Roger's shop was unlike anything a 10-year-old car enthusiast could find anywhere else in a small Connecticut town. His own race cars sat alongside customer vehicles that included Ferraris, Maseratis, Alfa Romeos, and an assortment of the kind of machinery most people only saw in magazines. Roger let young Wayne sit in those cars. He talked to him about them. He treated the boy's curiosity as something worth encouraging rather than tolerating. Roger himself had a biography that could fill its own documentary. He served as an aviation mechanic in the United States Air Force, stationed in Germany, where proximity to European motorsport culture deepened an already serious passion for performance vehicles. While stationed there, he became skilled enough behind the wheel to serve as a backup driver for the Porsche factory sports car team. After returning to the United States, he continued racing competitively and won national championships in both Formula V and Formula B categories. He was, by any reasonable measure, a genuine legend in the world of motorsport. And in his later years, that legend came to work in Wayne Carini's garage. Roger joined F40 Motorsports in the early 2000s, several years before Chasing Classic Cars ever made it to television. By the time the cameras arrived, the dynamic between the two men was already completely natural, because it had been building for roughly 5 decades. This wasn't a television friendship. It was a real one, layered and long and complicated in the way that only genuinely old relationships can be. The injury that started everything unraveling. In the summer of 2017, Roger Barr was working at F40 Motorsports when he sustained a serious leg injury on the job. The work involved the Minerva, the rare Belgian automobile Wayne and his business partner had acquired. The injury itself was damaging enough, but what followed made it significantly worse. The wound became infected. The infection was persistent and serious enough to require hospitalization for a man who was 82 years old at the time, an age at which a severe infection carries risks that simply do not apply to someone younger. Roger was not the kind of man to accept being sidelined. After being discharged from the hospital, he went back to the shop. He could only manage half shifts, 4 hours at a time, pushing through pain that would have kept most people at home entirely. But his legs continued to deteriorate, and it eventually became clear that he needed major surgical intervention. Doctors determined he required bilateral knee replacement surgery, meaning both knees, a serious procedure for anyone, and a particularly grueling one for an elderly man already weakened by a prolonged infection. Roger Barr was injured on the job. In the state of Connecticut, part-time employees are covered under workers' compensation law. But Roger reportedly did not receive workers' compensation for his lost work time. His son posted updates on Roger's behalf on social media, explaining the financial pressure building in the household. Roger himself later confirmed publicly that his only income during this period came from his mechanic's salary at 40 francs, now reduced because he could only manage half shifts. A man in his 80s, injured at work, facing double knee replacement surgery, with medical bills accumulating and no compensation for the income he had lost. What fans discovered that changed how they saw the show entirely. When Roger's friend Steve Cripps launched a GoFundMe campaign in 2018 under the title Friends of Roger Barr, the stated goal was $35,000 to help cover the cost of his knee surgeries. The campaign didn't quite reach its target, but it came remarkably close, ultimately raising nearly $30,000 from fans who had never met Roger in person, but felt, after years of watching him on television, that they owed him something. That response was remarkable. But buried inside the campaign details was a fact that landed harder than the medical story itself. Roger Barr, despite appearing on Chasing Classic Cars, across countless episodes spanning more than a decade of television, had never been paid a single dollar for his on-screen appearances. His compensation from Wayne's operation was strictly his mechanic's salary. Nothing additional for the camera time, nothing for the audience he helped build, nothing for the fan following that made people travel to Glastonbury, Connecticut, specifically hoping to meet him. Wayne Carini had built an estimated net worth of over $20 million during the years the show ran. The man working beside him in the garage, the one fans sometimes preferred to see over Wayne himself, was surviving on a part-time mechanic's wages. When this became widely known, the reaction from the fan community was swift and sharp. It reframed the entire GoFundMe in a way that was deeply uncomfortable. The story was no longer simply about loyal fans helping a beloved figure through a tough moment. It was about fans providing financial support that, in the minds of many, should have come from the employer whose television brand had been significantly built on that person's presence and personality. Whether Wayne had a legal obligation to compensate Roger for his on-screen appearances is a separate question from whether he had a moral one, and the audience reached its verdict quickly. The email that ended 6 decades in one paragraph. Roger spent months trying to return to work at F40 Motorsports after his surgeries. He attempted to go back multiple times and was turned away. He said publicly that he was denied a return on several occasions without a clear explanation. For a man who had shown up to the shop on half shifts while still in physical pain just to stay useful, being turned away repeatedly without explanation was its own particular kind of message. Then, in early 2020, the answer arrived. Not in a phone call, not in a conversation, not with a visit from the man Roger had known since Wayne was 10 years old. It arrived in writing. A formal termination letter, or in some accounts an email, informing Roger Barr that his employment at F40 Motorsports was being ended. After more than a decade working for Wayne and nearly 6 decades of knowing the Carini family, the relationship was officially over in the most impersonal format available. Roger said he thought it was a joke when it first arrived. The idea that something spanning that length of time, that depth of shared history, could end in a written notice without a single personal conversation beforehand was not something he could immediately process as real. And then it became real. He also discovered that getting his personal tools back from the shop was not going to be straightforward. Those tools, instruments of his trade accumulated over a lifetime of professional work, were not simply returned to him. The relationship had become so strained that Roger had to retain legal counsel just to recover his own property from a building he had worked in for years. A friendship that started between 2 neighboring auto shops in a small Connecticut town ended in the hands of attorneys. Wayne's silence and the allegation that complicated everything. Wayne Carini's public response to all of this was carefully managed and, to many observers, frustratingly incomplete. When interviewers asked about Roger, he described his contributions as invaluable and expressed respect for him. These were not hostile words, but they were not answers to any of the specific questions the situation raised either. Wayne never publicly addressed why Roger received no television compensation. He never commented directly on the GoFundMe or what it implied about the support Roger had received. He never explained why the ending of a 6-decade relationship was handled without a personal conversation. His businesses continued to grow during this entire period. He was running 3 separate operations in Portland, Connecticut: F40 Motorsports, Continental Auto Collision, and his personal restoration shop. He launched a magazine called The Chase and a podcast. There were reports of discussions with other networks about future television projects. The contrast in trajectories between the 2 men was impossible to ignore, and it did not go unnoticed by people who had followed both of them for years. Then something surfaced that shifted the entire shape of the story. A report emerged claiming that Wayne had spoken about the split with visible emotion and offered an accusation that had nothing to do with business at all. He allegedly stated that Roger had treated his youngest daughter, Kimberly, as though she did not exist. Kimberly Carini was diagnosed with autism as a child, and that experience transformed Wayne's life entirely. He has organized and sponsored charity events for autism awareness, spoken publicly about his commitment to families navigating similar experiences, and by every account made his daughter's well-being a central priority in everything he does. A perceived slight against her would not land as a workplace disagreement. It would land as a betrayal of the most personal and unforgivable kind. Whether the allegation is accurate, and Roger has not publicly confirmed or detailed it, only the 2 men involved can say with certainty. What it did was transform a story that looked like a straightforward case of a wronged employee into something messier, more human, and far more difficult to judge cleanly from either side. 2 men, 2 versions of events, one friendship that neither of them has been able to publicly account for in full. The garage where Roger found what he had been missing. After the injury, the surgeries, the denied return attempts, the termination notice, and the legal fight to recover his own tools, Roger Barr did what he had always done when life got difficult. He went back to work. He found a new professional home at the Paddock Car Restorations in New Britain, Connecticut, a garage with a serious reputation for meticulous work on classic and vintage European automobiles, which made it exactly the right environment for a man with his specific expertise and 6 decades of accumulated knowledge. The owner of the paddock, Michael Donnelly, was already familiar with Roger's reputation long before he walked through the door. Donnelly welcomed him with the kind of genuine respect that had been absent from the final stretch of his time at F40. He described Roger publicly as a walking encyclopedia of knowledge about classic cars. Roger's own words about the paddock were striking, given everything that had led up to that moment. He said that when he first walked in, he felt as though he had died and gone to heaven. He called it the happiest place he had ever worked. For a man who had been a national racing champion, a backup driver for the Porsche factory team, and a television figure watched by millions of people, that statement is not a small thing to say. The paddock also produced a YouTube series called Roger's Corner, featuring Roger speaking directly with fans about cars and his career, giving him a platform that was entirely his own and free from the pressures of network television. More content followed under the format Ask Roger, where viewers submitted questions and he answered them in his own time, in his own words. For a man whose on-screen presence had been managed and packaged for years inside a structured television show, having that kind of direct, unfiltered access to the people who admired him was a genuinely different experience. He was not a supporting character in someone else's story anymore. He also said something that reframes the entire television chapter of his life. He said the work at the paddock was not nearly as stressful as filming chasing classic cars had been, which means that what looked like a comfortable, casual garage partnership on screen was, from at least one participant's perspective, something more pressured than it ever appeared. The cameras had a way of flattening complexity into warmth, of making a working relationship look uncomplicated, because that is what the format required. What Roger described in his own words pointed to a different experience underneath the surface. The tools, the lawyers, and what the ending actually said. Roger Barr had to hire an attorney to get his own tools back. That single fact is worth sitting with longer than most of the other details in this story because it is the one that seems to have stayed with fans most stubbornly. It wasn't about the money, though the money mattered. It wasn't even entirely about the termination letter, though that mattered too. It was about what the tools represented. Those were instruments Roger had carried through a professional life that spanned Air Force bases in Germany, national racing circuits, and a television show watched across multiple countries. They were not shop equipment, they were his, and getting them back required legal intervention. The overall picture that emerges when you lay all the pieces out is not a simple one. Roger was injured at work and did not receive workers' compensation. He was never paid for years of on-screen appearances that contributed significantly to a brand worth tens of millions of dollars. He was denied a return to work multiple times without explanation. He was terminated by written notice after 6 decades of connection to the Carini family. He needed a lawyer to retrieve his property. And through all of it, the man whose name was on the building said very little publicly that addressed any specific part of what Roger experienced. Roger later confirmed on social media that he had never been a millionaire, directly pushing back against rumors that had circulated online, suggesting he had quietly accumulated wealth from his television years. He said plainly that he had worked his entire life to keep a roof over his head, and that the show had never changed that reality for him. Wayne Carini, for his part, has maintained that he holds Roger in high regard. He has also raised an allegation that, if true, adds a dimension to this story that cannot be reduced to a payroll dispute. The full truth of what passed between these two men in the final months of their professional relationship belongs to them alone. What the public record shows is a partnership that lasted for decades, generated genuine affection from millions of viewers, and ended in a way that neither the friendship's length nor the warmth of its television presentation prepared anyone to expect. Roger Barr found his peace in a smaller garage with quieter people and no cameras. Whether that counts as a good ending depends entirely on what you think the story was ever actually about. If 60 years of shared history between two men can end with a written notice and a legal dispute over tools, what were the cameras on that show actually showing us all along? You enjoyed this unveil? Smash that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more untold Hollywood tales, and hit the bell so you never miss a drop. Want more? Check out another one of our videos. Thanks for watching.